That great blue heron will become prominent throughout my message today because of the solitude. And you know, when it's time for the great blue herons to mate, they gather in the tippy tops of trees, one more notch down, and they choose their mates that way. And then they build their nests, they lay their eggs, and then they go back into solitude. It's good to be back from the road. The best part about being on the road is getting home. But you know, while I'm out there, I have the opportunity to listen to audiobooks while we're driving down the road. And so this past trip, I had the opportunity to listen to 3 great books, including Scott Peck's book, The Different Drum. And I would like to thank Paula Green. Where is Paula Green? There she is, Paula Green, for giving me a library book of The Different Drum. And it was the timing was so perfect. And I'll talk about it later. In addition to The Different Drum, though, also listened to A Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, as well as a book by Chad Meng Tan, a Google engineer, who made some surprising discoveries about developing an extraordinarily capable mind that is profoundly peaceful, happy, and compassionate. I think the book is called Search Inside Yourself. I think the whole trend of using the word mindfulness came about 10 years ago from Google when he wrote this book. But today, The Different Drum is going to be most of my message. It's going to be coming from that. And I've had a real breakthrough, thanks to Paula's initiation, into understanding my purpose and how I want to inspire you to find your purpose here at the center of universal light. You see, we're all mature adults. We've lived our lives mastering the sense of rugged individualism, that we were all taught by our parents, by our teachers, by schools, institutions, society, and you know what that is, stand on your own 2 feet, be independent and self-reliant like the great blue heron. We all come here from different beliefs, different backgrounds, different stories, but what I believe that we're all hoping to leave with here today and every Sunday is a feeling of, or the spirit of, real community. What has emerged for us as individuals because of this model of rugged individualism is now we suppress our failures, our inadequacies, and experience an overwhelming sense of loneliness that blankets much of our society today. It's my hope and prayer that the center of universal light can become a community. But before we can build community, we must let go of certain ideas that may be getting in the way. One of those is that the measurement of happiness is the absence of crisis. It's not so much the absence of crisis, but how quickly we address the crisis and get on to the next one. In fact, how many crises can we pile on ourselves in one lifetime? In the Chinese language, the word for crisis has 2 characters. One of them means danger, and the other means hidden opportunities. One of the first steps is to admit to ourselves that far from being in control, we are often in the throes of our own inner turmoil. The goal here, of course, is building a community. But before we can be honest with others, we must become honest with ourselves. A hole. That's right. If anything I say hits you, if I mirror you, say a hole. Or just raise your hand. I testify. Stick with me, because I want to show you how being honest with being honest with yourself helps build community. True community is profound sharing and caring for a group, for the group as a whole. It's a look deep inside ourselves so we understand what we have within us to share. One thing that Scott Peck acknowledges is how none of us really take ourselves seriously. We don't want to see ourselves as important enough to be able to leave our mark on history or to change anything. But if we're going to be able to get ourselves out of the mess we're in, people will have to feel that it's important for them to take responsibility. That the responsibility for history resides in each of us on our shoulders. So crisis is not to be avoided. Did you know that the whole community movement was spearheaded by Alcoholics Anonymous? Yes. People who go to AA are people in crisis. Actually, they're not in any more crisis than we are. They're not any more broken than we are, but because of the nature of their illness, they can't hide it. A vast part of the energies that drive our lives are our fears, doubts, anxieties, and disappointments in ourselves. We're all weak in some ways, and we're all broken and wounded human beings. Wait, am I the only one? Can I hear a ho from somebody? Help me out here. Oh, thank you. Okay. Feeling kind of lonely up here. It's amazing what happens when people share their brokenness or their woundedness. People start respecting each other a little bit more. For instance, you might hear someone say, "Sometimes I feel overwhelmed and powerless. I feel frightened, scared, and lonely. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" You might say to yourself, "Well, I've been there." This person is really being real and authentic. And yes, I'm here for you. This is the vital first step in forming a community. Two people side by side with shared understanding of their own weaknesses. And a shared understanding of their need for each other. Dr. Scott Peck says that he doesn't believe that community is something that comes naturally to us, except in times of crises. It's something that we have to work at. This is because most people do not understand the rules. These skills have to be learned. Community building, like peacemaking, is not a natural process. You know, we've seen the crises recently. The hurricanes in Texas and in Florida, the fires in California. Neighbors coming together, helping each other, strangers coming, people driving from other states with boats and food and water and blankets and clothing for people they don't even know. This is how we react as people in times of crises. But then when the crisis is over, you know, everybody goes back to their jobs, their way of life, they forget about the others. Kim and I had an experience of a crisis in the community that surrounded us on April 27th in 2011, when the Tuscaloosa tornado went through a small town in northeastern Alabama called Hyder, Alabama, and completely wiped out the house that she and our two dogs were in and the friends that we were staying with. Ironically, no one was killed by an F5 tornado in a house without shelter, but we did lose one of our dogs. But when the word got out, and we didn't even live in a community, our community was spread out over the United States, people began to pour money into an account for us to help us pay for the thousands of dollars in medical bills that Kimberly sustained in her injuries. So we're grateful for the outpouring of community in times of crisis. But you know, what is more natural for us is fighting with each other. Believe it or not, we assume that we're right. We don't listen to the other person. We don't even try to understand each other most of the time. Because in order to understand someone, we're going to have to temporarily walk in their shoes. And to do this, we have to be willing to give up a little bit of our pride. Now, if I can stand here Sunday after Sunday and weep before a gathering, you know that I have no pride. So maybe community building doesn't come naturally, but I do feel like it is being developed here at the Center of Universal Light. As we work at it, and eventually it will feel more natural. Dr. Peck leads many community building workshops around the world in which people from very different outlooks and backgrounds, as well as very different religions, come together with the hope of experiencing something they may have never felt before or experienced before. True community. What often happens first is that people will sit around in a circle and begin to talk, and then they think that nothing's happening, so then they decide that, well, we'll go around and introduce ourselves, and they tell each other how many kids they have, what jobs they have, how many pets they have, what their pets' names are, and that gets them nowhere. That's not what we want to know. What we want to know about somebody is what's in their spirit. In order to do that, we must see past the composure, the personality, the masks that we wear, to see beneath that to what they're actually experiencing. People begin to talk about their pain, their brokenness. We really begin to know each other and begin to respect some of the heroism that is going on in people's lives as they struggle with loneliness. Such openness brings people closer together. A community can be a haven for people, a safe place to express our joys and our brokenness, our victories and our defeats. As you saw right here on the screen, our mission statement is to hold the space for healing. When people are in crisis or in times of transformation. In a community, people learn to not pass quick judgments on each other, and how not to try to immediately heal others, fix others, convert others. Community is a spirit, and when you feel it coming, you'll know it by a spirit of peace. This can be felt here at CUL as a spiritual experience which Reverend Kimberly and I hope that you will have every Sunday. We want you to feel loved. We want you to feel accepted, connected, and inspired. Jesus said, when 2 or more of you are gathered in my name, I will be there. That means be there in spirit. Now, this doesn't mean that community is only a Christian phenomenon, because it's not. The truth is that a community can develop among Christians and Jews, Christians and atheists, atheists and Buddhists, Buddhists and Hindus, Hindus and Muslims, Muslims and Christians. Any group of people, regardless of their theology or religion, that are willing to practice the love, discipline, and sacrifice that Jesus exemplified will be able to go into community, regardless of their background and theology, and that the Spirit will be there, even if His name is never mentioned. What is community? It's an open and honest respect for each other. Our religious differences have often pushed us into armed camps. Can community be achieved in spite of widely held and vastly divergent religious beliefs? The answer is yes. But in order for us to make it into community, there is an enormous amount of giving up that must take place. That's why the crucial stage of community building is called emptiness, which means giving up that which stands between you and the community as a whole. I think this giving up can be achieved, and we can still preserve our own integrity. Most of this can be done by giving up the need to convert someone, or make them wrong, or heal them, and we can give all of that up without ever compromising our own beliefs. So, for example, you've got fundamentalists, giving up their urge to convert us sinners from smoking, drinking, sex, and swearing. And then you've got the born-again Christians trying to convert the fundamentalists from their sexism and other isms and their rigid ways. And then we all have to give up the desire to convert the atheists. And the atheists have to give up trying to bring us all to our senses. This can all be accomplished so that we can be together in love and learn how to appreciate our differences, as well as learn how to listen to each other. When we see how we're all able to give up these things, we'll see that in one little minor way, we are able to lay down our lives for each other, or some part of our lives. One thing that characterizes true community is inclusiveness. We don't get all the same kinds of people. The great enemy of community is exclusivity. That's what an organization is, a country club, or some churches. Now, in terms of our spiritual development, there are some stages that must be done in solitude, like the Great Blue Heron. For instance, our struggle with the great mystery of death, destiny, and the grieving process. Sure, community can help to a certain point, but some things must be done in solitude, alone. There are times in our spiritual development when we may need an institution to help with our understanding. But these institutions invariably turn out to be authoritarian. Then the next step, the next stage is a place where we need to begin to think for ourselves and ask questions. And that can tend to be more solitary. However, in the most mature stages of our spiritual journey, it cannot be done alone. It can only be done in community. I believe everyone here today has passed through their solitary stages and are seeking that community experience here at CUL. The rewards are in coming to know and feel a tremendous sense of belonging and acceptance for who you are without having to meet anyone else's standards. This can make a fast and permanent change in someone's life. We have the chance now to move from a traditional congregation to a CUL community. This can seem daunting at times because some people have their own agendas. People get really frustrated when their agendas are not being met, which means there's never a dull moment. Now, it can be very uncomfortable for me sometimes in a community environment when I have to speak up about something that seriously bothers me, like disrespect. Because it requires me to go into the unfamiliar, to take a step into the unknown. In a community, I just can't walk away from someone and say, forget about it, I'll never see them again. Because I will see them. If I don't speak up myself, I disrespect myself. And I disrespect the soul who hath sent me. And I feel separate from myself, and I feel separate from the community, and I don't want to feel that way. When Dr. Peck does a workshop, one of the few rules that he makes is that no one can drop out. That you have to hang in there.
Yeah.
They have to make a commitment to hang in there. The most difficult part of creating a community is the issue of motivation. Finding people who are motivated to create a community. There are 4 stages to creating a community. The first stage of community building is the stage that Peck calls faking it. People try to pretend that they're already a community. You know, with all the smiling, the hugging, the handshaking. It looks like a real community, right? But it's a pseudo-community. They're faking it. Things get duller and duller and people walk away and it doesn't feel like a community. Something seems to be missing. Community takes time, effort, and work. A pseudo-community is based on manners. As if a group has submitted to some predetermined set of rules. You know, like you should not say anything that will upset or alienate or antagonize anyone else. And if somebody does say something that upsets and antagonizes you, you should pretend that nothing actually happened and that it doesn't bother you. And if you have a disagreement, if a disagreement should start to surface, you should immediately change the subject. You know all these rules, you know, which any good hostess will tell you. Of course, it makes for a very smooth functioning group. But God is dull. It doesn't encourage intimacy or honesty or growth. The basic pretense of a pseudo-community, which incidentally is what we have with most churches, is that everyone attending is of the same belief and ideology and the same religiosity as everyone else. Is that a real word? Religiosity? Spell check made it. Now that we're into community building here at CUL, the first tenet we must learn is how to speak personally, using I, me, or my statements. Instead of you, him, her, they, them, us, we. Incidentally, this is also the first tenet of the Mankind Project, which I just attended last month, and the men's groups that I attend in Sedona weekly, which I'm going to be bringing here to Cottonwood as I complete more of my training, which begins tomorrow night in Phoenix. When we speak from the personal point of view, it is impossible to point the finger at somebody else and say, "You're doing it wrong." We tend to use generalizations as a way to separate ourselves from our own feelings. Yep. It's easier to get into community when we're all speaking to each other from I, me, or my statements. Then we're speaking from the heart, not the head. The second stage of community building is complete chaos. And it's always centered around converting. Peck describes it this way. You might have a person that says, for instance, that, "Well, I've got this problem. And I thought by coming here that I might find a solution for it." And the second person says, "You know, I had that problem. And I did this. And took care of that problem." But then the first person says, "I tried that. It didn't work for me." Then a third person says, "Well, I acknowledge that Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and that took care of that problem and all other problems too." Then the first person says, "Well, you know that Jesus Lord and Savior crap doesn't really work for me. It's not really where I'm at this point in my journey of my life right now. Frankly, it makes me want to puke." And then the fourth person pipes up and says, "But it's true." And then the gloves come off. There's a little thing that psychotherapists call resistance.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
That is, people don't appreciate unsolicited healings very much. So the healers try harder. And the person gets their back up against the wall, and then they try to heal the healers. Convert the converters. And it's absolute glorious chaos. They would rather fight than switch. In fact, people are much more comfortable fighting and chaos Then the next stage of the community building process, which is called emptiness.
Yeah.
This is the hard part. Because even though many of us extol our own spirituality, we are terrified by the stage of emptiness, which is where people empty themselves of whatever is standing between them and community. Which includes many of our defenses, some of the things that make us feel safe. You know, it's a risky stage, and the most painful one. Dr. Peck tells the leaders he trains, it is not their job to bring a group into community. It is their job to lead a group to emptiness. And from emptiness, once everyone in a group is empty, then community automatically comes into being. I think he means here that there's room now for a community to come into being when people are now empty. Empty is difficult, but it's essential and it's necessary. Would you agree with the notion that nothing characterizes life more than change? Oh, is right. You have inanimate objects, of course, that don't appear to change very fast. But then you have animated objects like us human beings that are constantly in change, changing all the time. If we try to avoid the pain of change, we are possibly going to keep ourselves alive physically, but we will not be alive spiritually or psychologically. It is necessary for us to be open to change, open to emptiness, as well as question the sanctity of our own beliefs and be willing to give them up if necessary. There are certain things that most of us have to become empty of. And among the first and foremost is expectations of what you think the experience of community is going to be like. And then there are also certain kinds of prejudices, likes and dislikes, and our theology or ideology. In order to even listen to someone else or hear what they're saying, we have to set aside for the moment or empty our minds temporarily of things that are in our minds. How many of you besides me, from time to time, are so busy preparing your reply to what somebody else is saying that you're not even really listening to them? So we have to empty ourselves, even to be able to listen to someone else or hear what they're saying. But change, even though it might feel like a death of something, does in no way mean that we have to give up our integrity. In fact, you will find out that we increase our integrity by being open to change. Ultimately, we're only going to preserve our integrity by giving up old ideas or old positions. People are not going to change in ways that they do not find ultimately useful or workable. So here's the community cycle. First, you have the pseudo-community. Second, you have the glorious chaos. Third, you have emptiness. And fourth, a community that emerges as a whole new spirit of peace. Once somebody has had that experience of community, to not have it anymore seems intolerable. Community building is such a transformative experience for people who have experienced it that they will never settle for a pseudo-community again. I did not know when I stepped into this role as a co-founder and a minister what my job would be like. But now I know that my job is to lead you as a group into emptiness. And out of that, a true community can naturally evolve into the center of universal light. Thank you. I'm Reverend Arvel Bird. Now, my brothers and sisters, let's all enter into emptiness. Let's go into silence now and empty our minds of anything that is preventing us from giving each and every person in this room the benefit of the doubt.